Hey folks, I'm Craig Newmark from Craig Newmark Philanthropies, but I'm better known as the Craigslist guy. It's my pleasure to welcome you all to the 92nd Street Y, New York, or 92NY. That's 92NY. For everyone watching the program in person and anyone watching online, we thank you for tuning in. This is part of the Recanati Kaplan Talk series, and it's also part of this Newmark Civic Life series, which is a pro-democracy initiative out of the Belfer Center for Innovation and Social Impact, which I'm really proud to support. Fighting for democracy is something that we're all part of. We're all expected to play a part these days. It's a big deal. 92NY also wants to thank the Lyndon Robert Safran and Edith Kenner Foundation for their generosity in making tonight's event possible as well. First, I want to introduce our moderator, Jeff Greenfield, and our guest, Al Franken. Now, Jeff's a real serious journalist. He's award-winning for decades. He's been hosting important conversations with political leaders, with reporters and media experts at 92NY for his special series In the News. Now, Jeff has served as a senior political correspondent for CBS, for CNN, and a Politica and media analyst for ABC News. Nowadays, he's acting as a political analyst for Politico and PBS NewsHour. Our special guest is Al Franken, former senator of Minnesota. He's a 5-time Emmy Award winner. He's also a New York Times best-selling author, and he's one of the original writers on Saturday Night Live. Now, this guy is seriously smart and a public figure who's doing what he can to help preserve American democracy. I'm glad that American democracy is getting support. And not many people can say that they've written both for Saturday Night Live and written a key provision in the Affordable Care Act. He has a great podcast, which I've been listening to, and it's really good because he's interviewing people about what's going on with our country, but also interviewing people who are important in the current comedy landscape. Today I listened to his interview with Patton Oswalt, which reminded me about the importance of comedy in politics. I only wish I was good at it. We're looking forward to hearing what he has to say about, well, in the serious divisions in the House and Senate and within a polarized electorate. Hey, join me in welcoming Jeff Greenfield and Al Franken. Enjoy the show.
Hey, everybody. Sarah?
I know at least some of that applause was for Al, but thank you very much. Just a housekeeping note. We take questions from the audience on pieces of paper to avoid speeches. And for those of you watching online, you can send in your questions. I have no idea how, but I'm sure they've explained to you. So, look, this is going to be there's some pretty serious stuff out there, but I have to begin with this question. As you watched a comedian play a president and then become a president and become an international hero, how did you now assess the role of comedians as potentially high political leaders?
Well, as you know, comedians are the bravest people in the world. And, of course, Zelensky is Jewish, so Jewish comedians are the bravest. And Jewish comedians who go into politics are the bravest people in the world, and there's only 2 of us.
I think that wraps it up. Now, coming back to planet Earth, look, it is not exactly a secret that prospects for your political party this fall are somewhere between dire and I can't look. You know the drill, what history says about the presidential party, what happens when the president's approval ratings are low, the country is in a sour, dyspeptic mood. And the margins are non-existent. If the Democrats had one of the great midterms in history, they'd lose both houses of the Senate. So my question to you is, do you have any thoughts that would make Democrats feel slightly less depressed or even possibly more optimistic about what's ahead?
There are headwinds. Like that's the technical term that you mentioned. There have been some developments, this leak of the Alito opinion. Americans don't want to see Roe go away. There's going to be next week, starting I think next Thursday in prime time, hearings on January 6th. And Jamie Raskin said it's going to blow the roof off the Capitol. Just to be clear, that's not what they're saying.
Metaphorical as opposed to...
Well, metaphorically, but he's not saying that the people storming the Capitol wanted to blow what they did was bad enough. So those are developments that I think will also in June they'll be coming out with more terrible opinions on the EPA and on just on a whole slew of other stuff that people won't like. That said, it's going to be tough. But I think when people look at this is a choice, it's always a choice. And the choice is there are people who will say, well, Democrats didn't get Build Back Better, the elements of Build Back Better, which I would argue were people didn't understand what they were. I would have put them on the floor. I've been saying this on my podcast since last October. Put them on the floor. They're amazingly popular elements. Universal pre-K. If you look at universal pre-K, the return on investment has been proven over and over again. Kids who have pre-K, early childhood education, get left back a grade far less. The girls get pregnant less in adolescence. They graduate. Boys and girls graduate from high school more. They go to college more. They get good jobs and fewer go to prison. That would have been great, but people don't know that was part of the package. And there's one thing after another in that. I wanted us to put that on the floor. Okay, so we didn't get that done. Hopefully there will be a package of something before the election that will include things like Medicare negotiating with pharmaceuticals, raising taxes on upper income people, which is the Trump people want.
But here's, I get this, but here's the thought that keeps going through my mind. You know the famous philosophical notion, if a tree falls in the forest and nobody hears it, did the tree fall?
Yeah, and
the answer, of course, is yes, because if you're a deaf person standing under the tree, it will kill you, but they don't get into that. My point is, the public doesn't seem to know even what was accomplished. Some newspaper did a story, you know, the rescue plan. It took God knows how many kids out of poverty. It saved God knows how many businesses. It kept states and cities from bankruptcy. And no, it's like it didn't happen. It doesn't register as an achievement. And whether that's bad messaging or whether people are overwhelmed by COVID and whatever, isn't that part of the problem, that what was done doesn't seem to matter? Obama, in his memoirs, gets really angry at the left for being so critical about what wasn't in affordable care, that they didn't treat it like an enormous victory. And I'm wondering if some of that, as you heard people on the left go after the various negotiations that were going on, whether that robbed Biden of some of what he should have had credit for.
I do think there were those on the most progressive side of our caucus who kept thinking that we were going to do a reconciliation package with everything that they wanted. And I think that made it harder to get Manchin and Sinema. I'm not there. I don't know how possible this would have been. The reason to put these things on the floor, and I started to mention some of them, is that people would like them. And you would put them on the floor and debate them, and people would see what they were. All they know about Build Back Better is it's the press, right? It's the media. It's all inside baseball and horse race. So it's all, is it 3.5 trillion?
Right.
Is it 1.5 trillion?
They knew the
Didn't know
money.
anything that was in it. If you put that stuff out there, people would have said, I like that. I like subsidizing childcare. Every other country, developed country in the world does that. Why don't we do it? And that would allow people to go back to work. That's a frustration of mine. But what I'm getting back to is the alternative is an unacceptable party. We're talking about democracy. The Republican Party now is an autocratic party. And you see it in the Supreme Court. You see it how they got their 6-3 majority. You see what they're going to try to, what they're doing with it. But you see that, for example, they won't take up gerrymandering.
Right.
Supreme Court. And so you have all these state legislatures gerrymandered. You have, they allow voter suppression. They are a party that they believe 60-some% of Republicans believe that the election was stolen.
And I want to, that specifically I want to get back to, but let me hold it for a second. So Georgia just had a primary.
Yes.
After imposing restrictions on how easy it was to vote, they had a huge surge in turnout. Mm-hmm. Huge. Now, whether that was people wanting to speak back to the people in power, or maybe the rules weren't as draconian as first presented. And when you mention the January 6th committee and the hearings, so that's a committee, through the judgment, I guess, in part of McCarthy, that is all Democrat except for the two of the only Republicans in the universe that are willing to speak out against Trump, right?
Right.
Liz Cheney and Kissinger. So my skeptical notion is those hearings will start and people will say, oh, it's politics again. It's the Democrats injecting bodily fluid upon the Republicans. I want to be polite, it's the 92nd Street Y. We've been here before. This is just one party trying to run down another, as opposed to what many nostalgic people remember back 40 years ago, or 50 years ago now, when a whole bunch of Republicans said, my God, that president was trying to do illegal things. Are you worried that the politicization of the country in general is going to make these arguments less potent than they otherwise would have been?
We're so divided now, and we're in such two camps, that it's very, very frightening. And it is definitely a threat to our democracy. And I think I have a PAC, Midwest Values PAC, where I'm investing in certain kinds of races, including secretaries of state and attorneys general in states, also in keeping, Georgia. I did a lot of ground game in the last election with Unite Here, which is a great organization. They're the hospitality workers. They were on the ground in Nevada. I was first to give them in Nevada, first to give them in Georgia. They knocked on over 1 million doors in Georgia. And thank God. And so Warnock is up again against Herschel Walker. Now, if you listen to Herschel Walker,
he's unique.
It's amazing.
Yeah.
And the fact that I haven't seen any polling, but what I understand, it's a real race. And it's remarkable. I do think that people showed up, and I think this has happened before. People showed up because the Republicans are trying to suppress the vote in different ways. One of the things they did in their election law was give the state legislature the ability to select
They
who
tried.
counts the votes.
They tried to.
No, they did. They're going to like be able to pick the board in Fulton County and stuff.
Well, they're certainly going to be able to affect who counts the votes. I don't think any legislature thus far, though it might happen tomorrow, has specifically said, by the way, we'll decide who the electors are no matter what the public says.
No, but when you're picking who's counting in a county,
As Joe Stalin used to point out.
yeah,
He said the important thing is not who votes, but who counts the votes.
yeah,
And who would know better?
yeah. So this. We might as well put it out there. The Republican Party is a threat to democracy. And I mean, look at the structure. We have these 5 Supreme Court justices who were nominated by presidents who lost the popular vote. We have in the Senate, the Republicans represent 45% of the American public, if you look at the population they represent. We're not democratic. We're not a democracy, a representative democracy.
Okay. So, in part, this is true because the Constitution is a counter-majoritarian instrument. It is specifically written to pull back what they saw as violent mobs and public opinion that would seize properties and recreate the French Revolution. So when people talk about the Senate, the only part of the Constitution that can't be amended, I like to ask this question because almost nobody knows. One part of the Constitution says you can't amend this. It's equal representation in the Senate. That's how committed they were to fighting the majorities. I think it was Virginia they were all frightened.
I think that was also about the smaller states
Well, that's right.
demanding that.
That's right.
So that was
my-
part of the compromise of getting all 13
Right. And
sign on.
And part of what I'm getting at is, this leads me to something I want to ask you about. You and Sarah Silverman in 2016, when you spoke at the Democratic Convention, were confronted by a group of dissidents or whatever you want to call them. And either you or Sarah said to them, grow up.
It was Sarah.
I always get you guys confused.
Well, I was very proud of her for
Yeah.
doing that. She's great, by the way.
Yeah.
Sarah Silverman.
Okay.
It's just, and I would go, she's written a musical that is fabulous called Bedwetter. And it's about her, it's from her book about being a bedwetter when she was 10. I have trolls who say nasty things about me whenever I go on Twitter or something. And so I just said I went to previews of Sarah Silverman's show Bedwetter, and it was great. And one of my trolls wrote a response against bedwetting. He was against bedwetting. How dare you before bedwetting?
Is there another side of this caucus? I mean, anyway. The reason that I mentioned the grow up comment was that it seems to me that one of the things that happened with the Democrats, apart from your analysis, there's bedwetting again. Apart from your analysis that people didn't know what was in a lot of these Build Back Better, is that it struck me that there was a real sense of delusion, maybe even in the Biden White House, about what you could accomplish with only 50 members of your own party in the Senate, at least 2 of whom were prepared to say no, and a House of Representatives where the margin was 4. And every time I heard about the New Deal, I would think, well, let's see, Roosevelt comes into office with 58 senators plus about a dozen progressive Republicans. Lyndon Johnson comes in office with, I think, 68 senators and a bunch of moderate Republicans and 300 House members. Yeah, you can pretty well do what you want to do. You come into the White House with no margin for error. And as somebody pointed out, in that situation, you have to legislate based on what is going to get you the 50th vote. And my sense is that there was a sense of, we can do this now, that may have caused the Democrats not to present what they actually did and wanted to do in concrete ways. This is what we're going to do. This is what we've already passed. But to say, no, look, this is,
Well, we did get the infrastructure bill done.
Yeah.
Huge.
Yes.
And what was funny is that Trump, I was in the Senate for part of the Trump administration, and there was a period there where every week was infrastructure week. And this is a guy who came in office, I'm a builder, and he couldn't get infrastructure done, and everyone wanted to do infrastructure, and he couldn't do it. So this was actually a big accomplishment.
Yes, but wouldn't it have been politically more potent to get that take away Build Back Better, pass the infrastructure bill the first 3 months before your 100th day, and then go all over the country saying, here's what's coming, and here's your Republican congressman who voted against it. I got no sense that they understood the power of what they actually did, because they were bound up, well, we can't pass the infrastructure bill till we get this $3.5 trillion or whatever.
There's controversy, of course, about let's not do the infrastructure bill till we get the elements to Build Back Better. That's a strategic thing. So is my thing about putting it on the floor. I also have, when I was there, when I got to the Senate, the first day I got there, it took me a while to get there because of the recount. So I get there in like July, and first day I'm there, I start talking to some of the senior senators, and they're basically all saying this is the worst it's ever been. This is back then. And Carl Levin says, well, actually, it's been worse. And I said, when? And he goes, 1854. And
I didn't realize he had that much seniority.
Yeah. And I said, the caning of Charles Sumner. And he said, yes. I said, okay, well, that was in the lead up to the Civil War. I go, yeah, but since this is the worst it's been since then. Anyway, so, and it's just gotten worse. And part of what made it worse was Mitch McConnell and the filibuster. He filibustered as many executive nominations as had been filibustered in the previous history of the country. And so Norm Ornstein and I, my first week I'm there, on a Thursday evening, we do our last votes of the week, and then you go back to your office, you take the subway back to the office, and then you fly home for the weekend. So I'm getting in the subway, I see Jim Bunning from Kentucky, who I didn't know was one of the meanest people I've ever met. But I go up to him and I say...
Well, he also pitched a perfect game when he was a baseball player, so you got to give him that.
Pitched no-hitters in both...
A no-hitter and a perfect game, yeah.
In both leagues, he pitched no-hitters. But anyway, so but he was mean. And so I said to him, hey, Jim, have a great weekend. I'll see you on Monday. He said, I don't have to be here on Monday. It's a cloture vote. And I realized, oh, that's right. To get cloture, we needed 60 votes. And Ted Kennedy was sick at this point, so we still only had 59. And they didn't have to vote at all. So I talked to Norm Ornstein, who you know, and we've come up with this thing where instead of 60 votes to end the filibuster, you need 41 to sustain it. And 41 have to show up on the floor and then debate. And everything has to be germane, and they have to stay there. Not, you can, if they have 50, 9 can be off the floor at any one time. They can go in and out. And what that would do is it would make filibusters as rare as they used to be. So that's one thing we could do to restore the filibuster to what it was. Now it's just one person says, I object, and you have a filibuster.
Forgive this question, as Ted Koppel would say before asking a difficult one, but I really get the sense you miss it. You miss not being there in the middle of this fight.
Yep. I got a lot of good stuff done. My first bill I got passed 2 weeks in. It was to match 200 service dogs with 200 vets with PTSD as a study. It was supposed to be a 3-year study. It took 10 years. The VA didn't do the best job on this. But it turned out that it had a tremendous effect on these vets. I just was recalling today, I want to do this fast, that they write the bill that you put forward, and some office that writes these bills, and it comes to me, it's my first bill, and I start rewriting it. And my staff goes, "What are you doing?" I said, "Well, I'm just trying to make it sing a little bit." And they go, "You don't do that." But I just miss being part of the. I miss hearings.
Okay.
Boy.
Well, one of the things about you, I think you were the only non-lawyer on the Judiciary Committee and probably had more impact than any of the other guys.
I did play a lawyer in a sketch.
Well, forgive me then, as Topol would say.
Yeah.
And I've kind of made an executive decision not to take you through the circumstances of you leaving the Senate. So, just for the record, I think the number of people, it's cold comfort, who said this was a really stupid thing, and we did. It was pretty.
I agree.
Oh well, okay. So you've only come back to New York in the last couple of years?
A year.
Okay, so
almost a year and a half. I have grandchildren here.
Yeah, but you may not know that there's a Senate seat coming up in 2024. I can't quite remember the name of the incumbent senator, but it'll occur to me.
I just think that we're going to be focused in 24 on reelecting Biden or electing the president and holding the Senate, I hope, and winning the House or holding the House. And I don't think $40 million spent in a primary is a very good idea. If I did run, I guess, against Gillibrand, my slogan would have to be, New Yorkers like a good grudge. And, well, no, that's not, that was a joke.
As Freud says, my man, there are no jokes. Okay, I just wanted to clear the decks on that. But you did raise an interesting question, the way you phrased the 2024 will be about reelecting Joe Biden or whoever runs. Mm-hmm. So here's what occurred to me today. This may be obvious, but I worked a lot on television, so the obvious is what I'm comfortable with.
Overlooking the obvious is something
No,
you
not overlooking
never do.
the obvious. No, hammering the obvious to death. So here's the point. So in 1980, Ronald Reagan's age is a big deal, okay? And it turns out that when Reagan left office after 8 years, he was younger than Joe Biden was when he took the oath of office.
Yep.
That kind of put me back a little bit, because I agree completely, as somebody who is more or less Joe Biden's age, that it's all individual. Some are, some aren't. But I can't help but think that if we go into 2024, where one of the candidates' age begins with 8, that's got to be dealt with, or it's got to be a problem. Do you think? Am I overstating this?
Well, it could be running against another candidate whose age begins with 8.
I don't think he's there yet. I think he barely escapes that. Because he's 5 years.
79?
Yeah, he's 5 years younger than Biden.
Okay.
I think that's.
Well, I know. I mean, this is something Biden says he's going to run, and I take him at his word. But I don't know how I'm 71, and I see. Okay, so I'll be 80 in 9 years.
Excellent work, Al. I think you may have just demonstrated my point.
I think I did. I don't know. Everybody is going through the same thinking and calculus, and I'm sure he is too.
There was a piece, I thought, really interesting piece in New York Magazine last week by Gabriel Benedetti, is that how you pronounce it? In which he kind of vacuumed up all of the conversations going on among Democrats, and will he run and should he run, and throwing off names of possible replacements that I would suspect the great majority of people may not have heard of. Governors like Rory Cooper of North Carolina and Solis of Colorado. And I'm thinking, this is a tricky place for a political party to be in if this is the conversation that's swirling about. Not to mention the fact, here's another thing I realized was obvious. Every Democratic vice president since Alban Barkley has eventually become the nominee of the Democratic Party for president. So how do you what's the argument to say, well, now that we have a vice president who doesn't look like all the other ones, we'll dump her? It seems to me that that would create a problem within the base of the Democratic Party that is pretty damn significant.
I think that you want to pick the best nominee to be president. And I think probably that if Biden does decide not to run, and I'm sure Kamala Harris the vice president, will run, and that'll be up to Democratic voters. And we'll see who the other people who are challenging her are. And that's the way, just the way it works.
Okay. I just note, the only exception I would have is Humphrey, because he got nominated after Bobby Kennedy was killed, and no one knows what might happen. But there seems to be almost a tropism where eventually the Democrats turned.
I understand. And,
okay, enough. I want to turn to a much more immediate topic, and that's guns. Guns.
Yep.
You were in the Senate 10 years ago when Sandy Hook happened. Mm-hmm. And I'm remembering that there was all kinds of talk. Yeah, we'll find a bipartisan compromise. Senator Toomey, the Republican of Pennsylvania, is going to work with, I can't remember the Democrat, and nothing happened. Is that something that, as we look at what happened now, should our expectation, if we're realistic, be nothing's going to happen? That the Republicans are simply too wedded to guns that you're going to get anything done?
I hear that there's some bipartisan attempt to do something that maybe a red flag law, which is about, someone who has mental illness, preventing them from getting a gun. But to me, that's not what this is really about. We need to get rid of, it's crazy to have these assault weapons. Here's a story. So Ted Cruz gets elected in November 2012. A month later, Sandy Hook happens. And I sign on to the assault weapons ban. On January 3rd, Ted gets sworn in. He comes over to me, he doesn't introduce himself, and he just says to me, anybody who's for the assault weapons ban is engaged in sophistry. And sophistry is an SAT word, which is basically,
phony reason.
Being deceitful using a phony argument. So I say, okay, Ted, how am I engaged in sophistry? He said, well, Clinton's own Justice Department did a study and said it didn't work. And I said, no, it didn't. You're talking about the 96 study, and actually it said it looked like it did work, that gun violence went down 6% in 95, but it was passed in 94, the bill, and that there wasn't enough data to draw a statistically significant conclusion. Now he gets mad. He goes, oh, you just go back and look at the study. And I knew the study, but I go back, so I have my Judiciary Council just print out the relevant part of the study. I put it in my pocket, and the next day, on the floor, I see Ted, and I go, oh, Ted. I was a big Jack Benny.
I was going to say it.
Oh, Ted. Ted Cruz. So he comes, and I go like, yesterday, you said to me, anybody who's for the assault weapons ban is engaged in sophistry. And he said, no, I didn't. What a dick. This guy. And of course, course, like at the NRA convention, like 3 days after Uvalde, he literally says, the only one who will stop a bad guy with a gun is a good guy with a gun, which is an example of someone who writes a speech a couple weeks before an event and then locks it and doesn't rewrite it.
And not realizing that there were many good...
And what a disgusting thing. And of course, we had the ban from 94 to 2004. Then the gun industry started developing all these horrible weapons. The weapon used at Sandy Hook was a Bushmaster, designed to kill as many people, designed to be as lethal as possible in a small space. This guy used a Bushmaster. This is obscene. This is obscene, and this is disgusting. And what happened with that, what happened with Manchin Toomey, is that the NRA announced that they were going to score it. So if you voted for Manchin Toomey, they wouldn't give you an A, and you'd be primaried if you're a Republican, and that's why Manchin Toomey didn't pass. It's all, and these are kids. These are little kids, and God damn it. And how they're the pro-life party.
But I feel, to some extent, in a obviously decidedly non-funny way, that this is Groundhog Day.
This is what?
Groundhog Day, the movie where the same thing happens
course.
over and over again. The thoughts and prayers that, yes, we have to do something. We got to do something about the mentally ill. We got to do something
American people are overwhelmingly for banning.
So that, okay, the American people, 90% are for background checks and whatever. So why does is it just gerrymandering? Because there are whole states where the populace, the people, will vote out, not just in a Republican primary, will vote, John Tester in Montana has to walk a very fine line, and so do Democrats in a lot of these states. There are people who'll tell you, this, that Al Gore's position on guns cost him the presidency by picking up, Missouri, his own state of Tennessee. So it seems to me that beyond those statistics, which are valid, there is a pretty significant cohort of Americans who, for whatever reason, actually identify the virtually limitless acquisition to guns as part of what it makes a free country. I don't know how we got there.
I don't either. I'm from Minnesota. Minnesotans hunt. Hunting is pheasant hunting, duck hunting, deer hunting is a big part of people. It's like for many people, it's something you do with your dad, and it's something that is one of the great experiences of your life, and that's what it's supposed to be about. It's not supposed to be. You don't need an assault weapon. You don't need an assault weapon to kill a deer.
I'm never having gone after one. I'll take your word for this. And I also think there are cultural differences. I think if you grew up in the heart of New York City, you did not go hunting with your dad. You went maybe looking for a parking place, but you didn't go hunting. But the serious part about this is, yes, of course you don't need an assault weapon to hunt. But there are people who believe that taking that away from people is somehow the slippery slope down toward they're going to get our guns. It leads me to, if I might, a broader question, which is, do you think in this point in our political life, you could conjure up arguments that would actually change people's minds? You have a wonderful riff about what made your family a Democrat, and it's all about the many benefits that government provided that kept your family going. They're all kind of social benefits that were passed many years ago. I'm not sure that how many people, frankly, on either side, but I would argue much more, as Norm Ornstein says, asymmetrically on the Republican side, are open.
Or what?
To an argument, to a persuasive argument. Just says, here's with facts. No, I'm sorry.
Well, we were talking back in the dressing room about disinformation. Craig was talking about disinformation. And of course, this is one of the things that has divided us. I wrote few books. I wrote this book, Rush Limbaugh is a Big Fat Idiot, and Other Observations. And I wrote Lies and Lying Liars Who Tell Them, A Fair and Balanced Look at the Right, which is about Fox. And the point of it was that, the right wing was spreading a lot of disinformation, and I don't know what happened with that. But this is, and it's with social media, obviously, and stuff Tucker Carlson says, this critical race theory, and of course the great replacement theory. This is poison. This is poison. And this is why it is absolutely necessary that we do everything we can to not lose the Senate, which I think we have pickup opportunities in so many places.
Well, one of the things, by the way, in a couple of minutes, I'll be happy to look at the questions that you folks have written and the folks online have magically gotten to us. We should mention that if you are a Democrat looking for optimism, you can think back to 2010 and 2012 when at least 4 eminently winnable Senate seats for the Republicans were lost because of who they nominated.
Yes.
They were the woman who did witchcraft and the guys who explained that rape,
Delaware,
rape happens, God can shut it down, or that it's not that whatever.
Indiana.
Colorado, Indiana, Missouri, West Virginia. And the Senate probably would have gone Republican earlier, but not for this. And now you can see, we don't know yet who all these nominees are, but Missouri may nominate a Republican former governor who was forced to resign after tying up his mistress and taking pictures of her and threatening to blackmail her. This is true. I am not making this up, and he's the leading candidate for Senate now. He may have some problems in November. The governor of Missouri, the Republican candidate, this guy Mastriano, who on election night said, I can shut down... Pennsylvania, sorry. I can shut down every voting booth in the state. And my feeling is not only will he lose, but he may drag down whoever the Republican nominee is.
Yeah.
We don't know.
For the Senate. Yeah, no, he'll drag down the...
Yeah, he'll drag down Mehmet Oz if that's the guy. And I think Mehmet Oz may have a problem because he moved to Pennsylvania about last Thursday. And so you can look at other states where this may happen. But you're doing something that in some sense may even be more important, is focusing on these races like for Secretary of State, who gets to administer the vote, who gets to count it. I think there is some reason for heart that Raffensperger won, not only won, but won big in Georgia.
Isn't that amazing? That's great.
Yeah.
He's a partisan Republican.
He is, and he endorsed many of the restrictive voting measures, but he didn't
but it speaks to how much power Trump has.
But I guess, once again, the question is whether, thank you. My car's been towed away. It doesn't answer the question of whether or not if a party has to hope that the other party nominates buffoons enough to keep the Senate, that, again, to me, is a sign of some headwinds, no?
Yeah, but it's nice when they do that.
Well, but I'm not sure you want to base an electoral strategy on, maybe they'll nominate...
But we'll take it.
Yes, okay. Fair enough. Okay, we got some questions here. I like to look at them before I read them because God knows what could be in them. But do you feel that humor is an effective tool when making a point?
No.
So in other words, your life has been a hollow charade.
I'm just going to one-word answer. Yeah, of course. That's 2 words. Okay.
But you and I were having this conversation, and I was making the argument that we've had 5 years, every night on television, of Colbert and Myers and Kimmel, and I don't know who I'm leaving out. Trump is so dumb, look at the stupid, and do you think that's, apart from preaching to the choir, I mean, it's like sinking.
Well, that's the problem, is that you're preaching to the choir. I just think that it's better when you're not. I do think a lot of those shows are funny. I really like Seth Meyers' Closer Looks. But to some extent, Patton Oswalt, who's this week's podcast, does this, and I won't do it because
Thank you.
Yeah, has this thing about why really you can't really do Trump humor effectively because he's so over the top that it just doesn't work. It's not effective.
That's I think the belief early was that he'd be laughed off the stage because he is.
Well, I mean, it was, Colbert used it a lot, to eat up time on the show. I mean, his opening monologue was very Trump heavy.
But it's, I just think that it was. I just remember a story that Barbara Boxer told me about. This was back in the days when Keith Olbermann was a major figure on MSNBC, and she said every night she'd go back and watch him. And I said, "Why do you do that? You spend 10 hours a day in that snake pit of a Senate. Why would you go home and now?" She says, "It's like sinking into a nice warm bath." And I think that is on both sides. I think that is really what people are doing. It's certainly not confronting issues, frankly, on either side. I think obviously more on a Tucker Carlson side, but people want to hear the reaffirmation that yes, Trump is a moron.
Yeah, we're divided into two sides.
Okay. Another humor-related question, but this is phrased artfully. Who did you find the more intelligent group, U.S. senators or SNL cast and writers?
There were SNL casts and writers that were smarter than some U.S. senators. There were some U.S. senators who were smarter than some cast and writers.
Okay, I mean, that's fair enough. It's
Yeah, I mean, there are different kinds of intelligence, too. No one... very few members of the Senate had the that humor intelligence.
Yeah, which leads me to this. How many genuinely funny people did you know in the U.S. Senate?
When I tell audiences, because I get asked this a lot, they ask who the funniest senator was, they always go, "Oh, no," and it's Lindsey Graham. So I'll tell you a couple stories. Lindsey's humor was all about how cynical he was. So one year we're going to Christmas vacation, and we're leaving Capitol, and he says to me, "Are you taking your family anywhere to get some sun this vacation?" I said, we're going to Vieques, Puerto Rico." And without hesitation, he goes like, "Do 2 fundraisers, one for the people who are for statehood and one for the people who are against statehood. They never talk to each other." And then when he was running for president, and of course that was your Trump one, we were in the Senate bathroom, and I just said to him, "If I were a Republican, I'd be voting for you." And he just, without hesitation, said, "That's my problem."
He definitely gets points for that.
Yeah, so that's about it.
Okay. Well, there was decades ago, there was a senator named Stephen Young who was the most, not mean exactly, but mean. And he is credited, although this story has many authors, I think it's him, who, when getting a really angry letter from a constituent, would write back and say, "Dear Mr. Smith, I feel it my duty to tell you that some moron has been stealing your stationery and forging your name." That's pretty good.
I would always write especially when I have an AOL account, I get hate mail from my AOL account. I would always write, "Dear so-and-so, thank you for your email regarding my," then I'd skip a few, "small penis." And then it would be a form letter. And
Did your staff approve of this, by the way?
well, I just thought it'd be funny if he'd go like, that's a form thing. And he just, he didn't even read it, like, that was.
It's a question that spins off another point I wanted to ask you about. This question is, how do you feel about the filibuster, especially where voter legislation, seen voting rights and gun control? And what I'm going to add to this is, it strikes me that out of frustration, a lot of people who are proposing, let's end the filibuster, let's expand the Supreme Court, let's have statehood for whoever, that to some extent, they sound to me like the old joke about how do you get an economist to fix a leak? First, assume you have a wrench. And the point being that a lot of these proposals crash up against reality. You are not going to end the filibuster if you have 50 Democrats, at least 2 of whom are adamantly opposed to ending the filibuster.
Well, we learned that. We learned that, right, on voting rights. We tried.
Yeah.
That was attempted. To me, I've talked to Joe Manchin about Norm Ornstein's and my proposal, and he was open to it at a certain point. He even said so in a tape that was released, a Third Way meeting. So we need 52. And we have all these pickup opportunities. We have to hold a few seats that
But see, and that's, I guess, what my point is, as a grizzled, whatever the hell that means, political observer, is you got to count the votes. If you had 54 senators, you wouldn't be having this conversation, right?
Right.
If Bill Nelson had won in Florida and Feingold had gotten back and that guy in North Carolina hadn't been writing sexually explicit notes to not his wife, you'd had 53 senators.
Yep.
But we don't
Yep.
have that. And I guess that's the part that, this is where the Sarah Silverman line comes through, that maybe Biden ought to have said to his entire Democratic legislative backers in the Senate, grow up. This is what we have. This is what I can do. Let's do it. Let's do it quickly. We can actually do this in close to the first 100 days, maybe, and let's go sell it for the rest of the. And
you needed 50 to do that, and he didn't have it.
Yeah, he had 50 plus for the infrastructure bill. He had more than that for the American Rescue Plan. If you add that up, plus it turns out Manchin at one point was.
No, he had only 50 for the American Rescue Plan. That was reconciliation.
Yeah, but that was okay. And then Manchin had said, I'd sign on at one point. He said, I'd sign on to $1 trillion, when everybody else was.
I know, but
you don't
he was
that?
A moving target.
Okay.
Yeah. Okay.
I just mean I think there were ways.
He
go ahead.
Has gone all over the place.
Okay. Who do you believe are the rising stars of the Democratic Party? The second question here is, who do you think beside Biden could defeat Trump? But take the first one because it's less loaded. When you look around, who do you see as?
Well, let me see. I like Mitch Landrieu. He was the mayor of New Orleans. He gave this unbelievably great speech when he took down the Confederate statues. He's kind of a guy's, I don't know, he's like a blue collar guy. I think he could be, I think Pete Buttigieg is, what I liked about Pete Buttigieg is when he would talk during those debates, you could see him actually thinking. The reason those debates were impossible to watch, do you remember when we had like 20 candidates and there were 2 panels of 10? and everyone was given like a minute for an answer.
If that,
And,
yes.
and their consultants would craft like a minute 20 answer. So they'd get interrupted at a minute 10, and they'd say, well, let me just finish, and they go to and they would do it as fast as possible. And it was impossible to listen to because they were reciting this talking point. Buttigieg could have been, he's so talented, he might have been just, but boy, he seemed like he was thinking. And he's incredibly smart. And so I think and of course he could run 40 years from now and be younger than.
It's almost literally, it may actually be literally true.
I mean, I don't know if that's literally
It's
true.
damn
but
close, I know that.
It's figuratively true, right?
It's truthiness, as Stephen Colbert said.
Yeah. It's, so he, rising star.
Oh, there's one person that really should come up, and that's Fetterman, who just got the Senate nomination in Pennsylvania. He is this 6'8" guy who looks like he's from World Wrestling. He dresses in a hoodie and board shorts. He goes into very red communities, and assuming he's recovered from the stroke, suddenly he became, oh, that's how you talk to these people. There was this whole outburst. Oh, I get it. Look different.
I'd like to see more. I mean, because they.
I understand. Of course, it's a
The cargo shorts can't be the whole thing.
Well, Chuck Schumer. Look, here's what I'm confident about. Chuck Schumer is not going to be campaigning in cargo shorts, and he's not going to grow a beard.
I decided to wear cargo shorts. And the polo shirt.
Apart from the laughs, you may have put your finger on yet another problem with the Democratic Party. He is the majority leader
You
of the
think
Senate.
so?
Jon Stewart always used to play him as like one of his aunts. The coffee wasn't warm enough, and I will not rest till I get warm coffee. You do it better.
Jon Stewart does it better.
Yeah, okay.
See, I was being modest. Do I get points? Okay, go ahead.
The Republican Party, it says here, and conservatives, seems more unified than liberals and Democrats. What can the Democrats do to organize and get out the vote?
Well, I'm not. They're unified in a horrible way, in a dangerous way.
But they're also, I have to say, they're not totally unified. There are some really bitter fights going on in these primaries within the Republican Party.
Yeah, I suppose. One of the things is that they have spent years and years, decades, putting this together with the dark money funding. And again, remember I talk about the Supreme Court, think about some of the decisions that have been made by the Supreme Court. And it's not this one, but Shelby County.
Cutting the Voting Rights Act, Section 5, right?
Yeah, with preclearance. And immediately, of course, North Carolina and Texas went to town on that. Citizens United, which Kennedy, when he wrote the opinion, said, the great thing about this will be transparency and disclosure. And we voted on a Disclose Act, and Scott Brown had just won, and every one of them voted down. It was 59-41. And so we have all this dark money. This is really dangerous, but they're pretty unified on that side.
Okay. And by the way, if you think these Supreme Court decisions are bad, because obviously the Alito opinion, if it holds, is the most famous or infamous, but what's going on beneath the surface that the press almost never covers is in some ways much more significant because they've just issued an opinion that essentially guts the Securities and Exchange Commission from doing anything unless the Congress specifically tells it to. It essentially neuters.
They are going after the administrative
They're going
state.
after what's called the administrative state, and what they're really going after is the entire structure of New Deal legislation. And what it would do is say, unless the Congress specifically says you can regulate these drugs, regulate these.
This is insane. And during Kavanaugh, you saw Ben Sass, who everyone thinks, oh, he's pretty sensible. He was talking about the Chevron doctrine, which is this. And he was going like, well, you know, HHS shouldn't have written the regs for the ACA. We should have done it in Congress. And it's like, are you friggin' kidding? It took 4 years to write those regs. It's insane.
Well, but that's where I think this court is going. Just on that one issue, there's a bunch of.
Yeah, but that's where they're going, and that's going to unravel. That's pre-New Deal stuff.
Yes. So, as my old mentor, boss Koppel, used to say, we're coming down to our final minutes, and somebody has asked the same question that I was going to ask you to wrap it up, which is, are you hopeful for our democracy, or are we witnessing the end?
I am afraid. I'm going to do everything I can. I urge everyone to do what you can. It's a dangerous time. And Trump, we saw this coming, but Trump really escalated everything.
Yeah.
And I really am looking forward to this January 6th because Jamie Raskins is going to blow the roof off the Capitol. God, I hope he's right. And God, I hope there's a smoking gun. And God, I hope it wakes people up. I'm skeptical, but we need a wake-up call because the Bannons of the world, these people have been operating this way. They love Hungary. They really don't care about democracy. They care about power, and they care about money. And this country, the gaps in wealth and income in this country are the worst they've been. Worse than they were in the 1920s. This is a troubling time. I just will do everything I can to the extent that I can. I wish I was back there. I wish I was in hearings and giving them hell, but I'm going to do everything I can, and I urge all of you to do that as well.
So having been doing this for a long time, this is the first time I've been back on this stage since COVID, and I have to tell you, there is no one I would rather have returned to the stage with than Al Franken. Thank you, buddy.
Right back at you.